It is Wednesday, it is 12 o'clock, it is time for Prime Minister's Questions. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is sitting alongside me watching these images as we wait for the Prime Minister to take to his feet. So, Sam, the final PMQs of 2024, what a year we've had.
That's right. I have to say, Jane, the tinsel must be just out of sight in that shot. But make no mistake about it, the final Prime Minister's Questions of the year is rather a different beast to the rest, if I'm being honest, because both the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition have to do something different. They have to be funny. That's how we'll judge them.
Light. A little bit of lightness today.
They've got to gee up the troops for the holiday, which is not terribly easy on the Labour side after the Waspi women announcement yesterday that they weren't going to compensate women in the 1950s who saw the state pension age raised without being being told about it. Kemi Badenoch has got to show a new funny gear as well. Can she do that? How will she do that? So there's all to play for, but it's often quite important because people remember the last one of term.
Reflecting back over the year, we've had 5 months of the Labour government and the Prime Minister is now on his feet.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I met the brave men and women serving on HMS Iron Duke and the troops serving in Operation Cabaret in Estonia. This Christmas, as every Christmas, members of our armed forces will be serving overseas, working day and night to protect Britain's national security. And I know that the whole House will join me in sending our deepest thanks to them, to our emergency services and everyone working to keep the country safe over the festive period. Mr. Speaker, may I also take this opportunity at the end of the year to thank you and the House staff for all your hard work this year. And can I wish everyone across the House a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Presently.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks. In 2021, Kerry and Francis Menai Davis, who live in my constituency of North East Hertfordshire and are in the gallery here today, tragically lost their son Hugh at the age of just 6 to a rare form of cancer. Now they are courageously campaigning to ensure that every parent who must leave work to look after a sick child in hospital gets the financial support that they need from day one. Will the Prime Minister meet with them and me to discuss implementing Hugh's law and giving their son a legacy that improves the lives of families at the most difficult time imaginable?
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Kerry and Francis? It is a heartbreaking case and commend them for their campaign on behalf of other families. I know the Minister for Social Security and Disability met the family yesterday, but no parent should endure losing their child to cancer, particularly at such a young age. We are investing £1.5 billion for new surgical hubs and scanners, £70 million for new radiotherapy machines, and we will set out our next steps on the Children and Young People Cancer Task Force shortly.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I send my warmest wishes to our armed forces at home and overseas, to the emergency services and everyone who will be working over Christmas. And can I wish you, Mr. Speaker, the House staff and all members of this House a very Merry Christmas. Mr. Speaker, for years, the Prime Minister and his cabinet played politics with the Waspi women. The Deputy Prime Minister said Conservatives were stealing their pensions. She promised to compensate them in full. Another broken promise. Now they admit we were right all along. But let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust... Let's ask about another group of pensioners whose trust was broken. Since the Chancellor cut winter fuel payments, how many extra people have applied for pension credit?
Mr. Speaker, the #1 job of this government was to put the finances back in order after the last government lost control. They left a £22 billion black hole and we had to take tough choices. We made sure the most vulnerable pensioners do get the winter fuel payment, and we have been encouraging and driving up eligibility for pension credit. So saying up to their entitlement, and she should join that campaign. But, Mr. Speaker, here's the difference. Because we've stabilised the economy, we can commit to the triple lock. That means that next April, pensioners get another £470. But here's the difference, because 2 weeks ago, the Shadow Chancellor said the triple lock is unsustainable. Their position, so pensioners would lose out under the Tories yet again.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't answer the question because he doesn't know the answer. There are 850,000 eligible pensioners not claiming pension credit. If they sign up, that will cost the Treasury £2.3 billion, wiping out the savings that the Chancellor claimed she would make. Before the election, his Chief Secretary told the public they had no plans to cut winter fuel. But they did have plans, didn't they? Age UK say cutting the winter fuel payment
Mr. Speaker, we've been driving up with a campaign for pension credit. It's important that everybody who's entitled to it claims that pension credit. And she shouldn't claim as some great victory the record of their government that people haven't signed up. We're the ones with the campaign. They should be supporting it. But because of the triple lock, pensions will be going up by £470 next April. She hasn't answered the question. Her Shadow Chancellor says the triple lock is unsustainable. So she needs to explain how pensioners will be worse off under a Tory government.
It is Prime Minister's question. Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, we protected the triple lock during all our time in government. Meanwhile, energy bills are increasing, despite his promise to cut them by £300. In Scotland, his party leader wants to restore the winter fuel payments. Across England, councils are scrabbling together funds for struggling pensioners. The tragic reality this Christmas is pensioners will suffer and may even die as a result of this cruel policy. Did the Chancellor consider the impact on councils and on the NHS, or does she just not know what she's doing?
The Household Support Fund was set out in the budget. She knows that. We're pushing up pension credit. But she now says they are committed to the triple lock. Her Shadow Chancellor says they're not, that it's unsustainable. Maybe over a sandwich or a steak, they could sort it out and come back and tell us what their policy actually is.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to misrepresent me to make his point. I don't need to misrepresent him to make my point. Yes. The truth is, he didn't think this through. Cutting winter fuel payments isn't just callous. It may not make savings. It could actually cost us all more. And that's not the only policy which is making things worse. The Chancellor's budget is a body blow to family businesses and also charities. Marie Curie have warned that Labour's budget will cost them nearly £3 million a year. This is a cancer charity saying they have no option but to reduce services. Did the Chancellor tell the Prime Minister that her jobs tax was going to hit charities?
Mr. Speaker, she's asked 3 questions about winter fuel with a leaving out. I'll come to that. But she's changed her mind on this. She used to say that the payments were a dead weight. She said there were members of her constituency who didn't need it. And they all stood in 2017 on a manifesto, a Tory manifesto that committed to getting rid of the universal winter payments for pensioners. So we can see what their real commitment is. As for the budget, we're driving up productivity.
I don't want to have to ring your mother. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're driving up productivity, prosperity and living standards. That's a pay rise for the 3 million who are the lowest paid. They should welcome that. A pay rise for those working in the NHS and better than expected wage growth just before Christmas. What unites all three? Delivered by Labour, opposed by the Tories.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what world he's living in. The economy is shrinking, and they did not think this jobs tax through or who it would impact. Another area affected is the hospice sector. Hospices believe the budget will cost them an extra £30 million. Yesterday, Conservatives voted to exempt social care, nurseries, charities and hospices from their jobs tax. Labour voted this down. So can the Prime Minister at least agree to fund hospices so they can continue their invaluable work helping people at the end of their lives?
Mr. Speaker, we put a record amount into the NHS in the budget to deal with the problem that they left, and we'll set out the funding arrangements for hospitals in the new year. But it's the same old, same old. They want all the benefits. She said to herself she wants all the benefits from the budget, but she doesn't want to pay for any of them. That's what got us into the problem in the first place.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, I did not hear a commitment there to help hospices, which is a shame. The truth is, this winter, people will be suffering because of his choices. The economy is shrinking, inflation is going up, and jobs are being lost because of his budget. Pensioners won't be able to heat their homes because of his government's decisions. They raised people's hopes but then smashed them with broken promises. And now we learn that he is about to give away our hard-won Brexit freedoms. Mr. Speaker.
And they don't care. And they don't care.
All right. Mr. Speaker, now we learn he is about to give away our hard-won Brexit freedoms. The truth is, they are punching the British people in the face, literally in the case of one of his MPs, and he will pretend that this is about the past. But we all know these are his choices, bad choices. If he's looking for a New Year's resolution, why doesn't he start with telling the truth?
I'll do it now. £22 billion black hole left by them. Record numbers on the waiting list. Nearly.
It's not a good time to leave the chamber, is it? Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, £22 billion black hole. Record waiting list with our NHS. They should hang their heads in shame. Immigration completely out of control. Nearly 1 million net migration. She was the cheerleader for all of that. She wants the truth. That's the truth. That's why they're sitting there. Mr. Speaker, whilst they cart from the sidelines, talking the country down, this government is getting on with the job. Record funding for the NHS. Money for our trains, buses, and yes, Mr. Speaker, potholes. Pay rises for 3 million of the lowest paid. Wages growing faster than inflation. Planning laws reform. Great British Energy set up. We're only getting started. Next year, we'll continue to rebuild, no matter what the blockers opposite say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I echo the words of the Prime Minister and thank you and all of our staff in this place alongside our armed forces and our emergency services and wish them a Merry Christmas. Mr. Speaker, March 2025 marks 20 years since the death of the only Member of Parliament to have held all four great offices of state: the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, James Callaghan was a true Portsmouth great and went to the same school as another true Portsmouth great, my dad, Terry Nolan. Does the Prime Minister back my bid for a plaque to be added to his former home in Copner, and will he come along to Portsmouth next year to unveil it?
Well, I thank her for her question. Jim Callaghan was a giant of the Labour movement and a great public servant. Mr. Speaker, he left school at 17, served in our Royal Navy before becoming the Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Chancellor and, of course, finally Prime Minister. And as a proud son of Portsmouth, I'm sure he'd be honoured to be remembered in such a way. Happy Christmas.
Can I just say to Mr. Mayor, I keep hearing, I heard you the other week over here, I'm hearing again that it's not a good time to push a luck today. Right, let us come to Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his praise and best wishes for our armed forces and our emergency services? And can I join others in wishing you happy Christmas, Mr. Speaker, and all the staff of the Commons, and indeed everyone across this House? I'm coming to sing in a minute. Mr. Speaker, I've had the great joy of spending time recently with some amazing young people from the Bath Philharmonia Young Carers Choir. They're a brilliant example of the power of music to make a difference in young people's lives. One member of the choir, Caitlin, has even developed a special new project to spread the joy of music to young people in our schools and communities. So will the Prime Minister meet Caitlin to hear more about her exciting project and work with us and others to support music in our schools and communities?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome his comments, and as you will know, today we're introducing the landmark Children's Wellbeing Bill to enable all children to succeed, including young carers. That increased the pupil funding premium to over £2.9 billion, which can be used to support pupils with identified needs, and that, of course, includes carers. And now young carers are on the school census, as he knows, that's since 2023. They have greater visibility, and schools will be better able to identify and support them. Mr. Speaker, he talks of singing. There was carols outside our front door on Monday, and my family was surprised to see the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, shamelessly plugging his song. We have strict rules about antisocial behaviour, but in the spirit of the season, I simply say Happy Christmas.
Sir Red David. Well, Happy Christmas, Prime Minister. Can I thank him for allowing the Young Carers Choir to sing outside number 10? I hope he and the staff enjoyed it. Our song is called Love Is Enough, but the hard truth is, for many young carers and young adult carers, actually love is not enough. These amazing young people need real action to help them with the challenges they face. So in addition to the measures that the Prime Minister just talked about, will he support the Carers Trust's Young Carers Covenant to make sure across government, across local authorities, we are supporting these young people with all the support they deserve?
We should support these young people, and we continue to work across the sector to ensure all schools identify, support and record data on young carers. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we boosted the carers allowance in the budget, but I agree with him in relation to these young carers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a very happy Christmas this year? For many in my constituency, and indeed across the country, particularly those in temporary accommodation, it won't be a happy Christmas. On the Tories' watch, temporary homelessness more than doubled. So what is the government doing to support families and children living in temporary accommodation, particularly this season?
Well, she's right about the appalling inheritance, which included record numbers sleeping rough, almost 160,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Speaker, we're delivering nearly £1 billion into councils to tackle homelessness, including increasing funding in Bolton over the next year. That includes dedicated support with housing, with mental health, and with employment. But we're also committed to tackling the root causes, and that's why we're building 1.5 million new homes and abolishing Section 21 no-fault eviction, something they said they were going to do and repeatedly failed to do.
Ben Lake. In 2022, the Prime Minister supported calls for fair and fast compensation for 1950s women impacted by the changes to the state pension. And yet, just yesterday, his government rejected those same calls out of hand. Mr. Speaker, is this what the Prime Minister meant when he promised to lead a government of change?
Mr. Speaker, this is a serious issue. Between 2005 and 2007, there were, I think, a 28-month delay in letters to women born in the 1950s about changes to pension age. That was unacceptable, and it was right that the government apologised for that. In 2011, the former Chancellor, George Osborne, then accelerated those changes with very little notice. That equally was unacceptable, and Labour opposed it at the time. It is a serious issue. It's a complex issue. The research, as he knows, shows that 90% of those impacted knew about the changes that were taking place. And I'm afraid to say the taxpayer simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence does show that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy.
Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent data shows that almost 11,000 Scots have been waiting for hospital treatment for over 2 years after referral. The equivalent number in England is around 113. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that this shows the catastrophic damage the SNP government have done to the Scottish NHS?
Well, he's right when he says the SNP is letting down patients in Scotland. As the Scottish Auditor General says, greater leadership is needed in the Scottish NHS. Waiting list targets are being missed. Spending on agency staff is skyrocketing. And delays to patient discharge are hitting record levels. They seem to be proud of that appalling record. We've provided the money, they've got the powers, they've run out of excuses.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the summer, thousands of commuters using Harlington and Flitwick stations have had to put up with nearly 8% of trains being cancelled in the evening peak, and nearly a third of trains that do arrive are more than 5 minutes late. Is it a mere coincidence, Mr. Speaker, that such poor performance follows this government's decision to pay off their union backers with no strings attached?
The trains and all travel was in an appalling state under the last government. We're clearing that up and fixing it, and he should be welcoming that.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Parliamentary Ombudsman concluded that an injustice was done to 1950s born women. It ruled that they are owed compensation and asked Parliament to intervene to deliver justice. In my constituency of Liverpool, West Derby, I have more than 5,000 women affected. And alongside a great many members in this House, I believe these women are owed compensation for the injustice done to them at the hands of the state. So will the Prime Minister give members the opportunity to vote on whether they believe Waspi women are owed compensation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've just set out the factual background and the percentage that knew about the change. And the simple fact of the matter is, in the current economic circumstances, the taxpayer can't bear the burden of tens of billions of pounds in compensation. Well, they're chuntering away. In 14 years, they accelerated the changes and not once spoke about compensation.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Caroline and Savannah, are just two of thousands across Devon, Cornwall and beyond who are living with postural tachycardia syndrome and have been unable to access adequate treatment since the retirement of the only consultant available to work with them in July. What action can the Prime Minister take to help me secure the treatment that my constituents need, and will he agree to meet with me and them to discuss the treatment of POTS in more detail?
Well, I thank her for raising this important issue on behalf of her constituents. It does underline the critical importance of the NHS workforce plan that we will deliver next summer to ensure that the export workforce is in place to get the NHS back on its feet. I am proud that we're investing an additional £22.6 billion to fix our NHS, and I will, of course, make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to deal with the issues of concern to her constituents.
Jodie Gosling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a very Merry Christmas. May I associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister and my gratitude to all of those that serve our communities over Christmas. I'd like to give special credit to foster carers in Nuneaton and across the UK for the incredibly important role that they play. We know that their care transforms lives, but the foster carers in Nuneaton tell me that there simply isn't the support that there used to be, and over 17% of children are waiting over 4 years for care. Recently, I was made aware of one child who had had 9 home placements before the end of Key Stage 1. Can the Prime Minister ensure that there will be a robust system to provide consistent and swift care when needed?
Well, I'm grateful to her for raising this issue because, Mr. Speaker, every single child deserves the best start in life, and there are far too many shocking cases of children being let down. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is being introduced today, and that does put children's interests at the heart of government policy, and I hope it will be supported across the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour promised not to raise taxes on working people, but farmers are some of the hardest working people that I know. Peter Douglas from Jedburgh has looked at the details of this policy, and he says Labour's inheritance tax increase will prevent him passing on his family farm to his son and daughter. They say Labour have betrayed them. They can't trust the Prime Minister to keep his words. They've got a point, haven't they?
If he would kindly pass the details of the individual case he's raised to my team, we will look into it. As he knows, we put a record £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years in the budget. Just 2 weeks ago, £350 million was put in to support farmers. That contrasts with the £300 million underspend of the last government on farming. And in a typical case, the threshold is £3 million, which means that the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected. But I'll look into the individual case that he's raised with me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently spoke to a man in Worksop whose son's arm was badly broken when he was knocked off his bicycle by an off-road biker speeding on the pavement. Dressed in black, no number plate, totally unidentifiable. The young boy no longer goes out to play. His experience isn't unique. What action is being taken to smash the bikes and put police back on our streets?
Well, I'm glad she's raised this because off-road bikes were a complete nuisance under the last government, got completely out of control. We're introducing new respect orders to crack down on off-road bikes, strengthening police powers in relation to dealing with this big problem that got out of control under the last government. We will also deliver 13,000 more neighbourhood police to ensure that we keep control of our streets, something that was lost under the last government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead announced plans to hike council tax by an unprecedented 25%. This would require the government's permission. Does he agree with me that this outrageous request should be rejected, that the borough might be a candidate for accelerated local government reorganisation, and my constituents should not be footing the bill for the persistent weak financial control and political failure locally?
Well, thank you for raising this issue on behalf of his constituents. We are, as he knows, committed to fixing the foundations of local government and keeping taxes as low as possible for working people. The budget announced real terms increase for local government with over £4 billion of added funding. And so we will put that support in place, and he's right to raise this issue.
Speak to briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have in our NHS many brilliant emigre and refugee surgeons from the greatly troubled Middle East. And I've been privileged to work alongside some of them, Iran, Iraq, and now, as we think, especially of Syria. What practical measures can the UK take to help ensure that Syria now has the best chance of becoming an open society and the second functional democracy in the region?
Well, I thank you for drawing attention to the people of Syria and to the health workers of all backgrounds who do vital work in our NHS. The fall of Assad's brutal regime is to be welcomed and should be welcomed, but we must be cautious about what comes next. We've provided £50 million of extra support to vulnerable Syrians, and I've spoken to G7 leaders to work towards a Syrian government that respects international law, universal human rights, and protects all citizens across all sectors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dave Dugan.
Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he's stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with Waspi women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago. That all changed in July, and he's now carping from right up there. We can hardly hear him.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker. I'm sorry I couldn't hear you over the hubbub. First of all, can I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and all colleagues across the House a very Merry Christmas, and especially the House staff. And also, I associate myself with the remarks thanking emergency services and our armed forces for their service. Mr Speaker, Christmas is a time for peace and goodwill. Given there are more conflicts now than at any time since World War II, and that all wars end with a peace, what is the Prime Minister's resolution to work with others for a more peaceful world in 2025?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I thank her for her question? And I'm sure colleagues across the House support the values of the Parliamentarians for Peace, which I know she is involved with, and their work to support human rights across the globe. And that is the sentiment, I think, that we take into this festive period. Thank you.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And it was good to hear that the Prime Minister visited British soldiers in Estonia yesterday before they have to spend Christmas away from their families. We would all like to see a lasting peace emerge for Ukraine in the new year, but Putin may take any deal brokered by Trump as a break in which to re-equip and rearm. What will his government do to deter Russia from restarting its imperial war of aggression following any peace deal?
Well, can I congratulate him on his appointment to the Intelligence and Security Committee and thank him for raising the question of our troops in Estonia who will be there over Christmas without their families, and they're right on the front line with a very clear sense of purpose as part of our NATO contingent, and we thank them. He's right that we must continue to support Ukraine, and that was the subject of our discussions in Estonia yesterday, and make sure Ukraine is put in the strongest possible position, whether negotiations or not, and be absolutely clear that this conflict could be ended straight away if the aggressor, Russia, backed off.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
The Waspi women fought one of the most sustained and passionate campaigns for justice that I can remember, year in, year out. We did promise them that we would give them justice. I understand the issue about the cost, but does the Prime Minister really understand how let down Waspi women feel today?
I do understand the concern, of course I do. I set out the history, Mr Speaker, but the research is clear that 90% of those impacted did know about the change. And in those circumstances, the taxpayer simply can't afford the burden of tens of billions of pounds of compensation. But I do understand the concerns.
Will Forster.
I know the Prime Minister is aware of the case of my constituent, Zara Sharif, who was brutally tortured and appallingly murdered by her father and her stepmother. I want Zara's legacy to be one where she's the last vulnerable child to be killed by people that should have looked after her. Will the Prime Minister ensure that an independent inquest and review is taken into Zara's death and it's held immediately in the new year so we can learn why public authorities failed, so we can ensure that it never happens again?
he rightly raises this absolutely harrowing case. And it is important that all the lessons are learned. There is an independent process going on, but we must be clear about overhauling children's social care to keep young people safe and looking again about the framework for homeschooling, amongst other things. So we need to learn those lessons. We are taking steps. There is a process going on at the moment, and I'll update the House in due course.
Alan Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the leadership he has shown in securing the £500 million deal to secure the future of the Hitachi rail factory in my constituency. A factory left in the lurch by the party opposite for years. And does he agree, will he agree with me that what we also need is a long-term plan for our proud high-tech rail manufacturing to drag it out of the mire it was left in by the Tories?
Thank you for that question. They really shouldn't groan. I went up to the Hitachi factory earlier this year before the election. The workforce were extremely anxious about the situation because they feared that there would be a gap between contracts. This is a gap that might mean people aren't going to get laid off, and he's chuntering from a sitting position, unable to understand the impact on working people. Mr. Speaker, the workforce were extremely anxious about the situation when I saw them, because they knew if their colleagues were laid off, then that would be bad for their colleagues in their community, and it would mean that they might go and get other jobs and not be able to come back if there was a new contract. I said then that I would do everything I could to ensure that we filled that gap, and I'm very pleased that just the other week we were able to say that there's a contract, and I went back up there to speak to the same workforce, and I can say they were very pleased that they don't now have those anxieties. They should be ashamed of their chuntering.
Final question, Dr. Luke Evans.
Mr. Speaker, as it's Christmas, will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Chris Middleton, who wrote a charity song to support Age UK, which has already raised £10,000. What's even better is it's likely to beat the leader of the Lib Dems and his single to #1 this year, proving yet again that the Lib Dems can't win. Something I hope we can both agree on.
I'm not going to adjudicate between the contending singles for the top of the charts, but I will end, Mr. Speaker, this is the last question, I think, by just repeating a happy Christmas and a peaceful New Year to everyone across the House.
Right, we'll let the front benches change up.
Well, that was Prime Minister's questions. The Prime Minister ending on a festive note. Sam Coates said he was looking to see if there'd be any tinsel in the chamber. Didn't spot any tinsel. Sam, were there any crackers from either side?
I think crackers is what you were left as if you were listening to that Prime Minister's questions. The Prime Minister did acknowledge he knew it was Christmas coming up, but there wasn't a lot of fun in that final Prime Minister's questions of the year. We promised you jokes. Unfortunately, like the Prime Minister, sometimes we can't always keep our promises. Prime Minister's questions feels like an art, or ought to be an art. Today's was drawn in crayon a little bit. And that applies as well to the Prime Minister's opponent, Kemi Badenoch. She threw a smorgasbord of things at the Prime Minister in the hope that something would sort of stick. Waspi women, winter fuel payments, inflation, national insurance, the triple lock, hospices, Brexit. I mean, I kind of got lost in the sheer number of little side attacks that she made, and in doing so, I thought really didn't land either a big point or a big argument. I think how she does Prime Minister's questions will be something that her team look at in the new year, because in the end you've got to make an impact, and it was a sort of nil point result, I thought, on the part of everybody really today. There was one powerful moment. That was an uncomfortable moment for Keir Starmer. That was when Diane Abbott, the left-wing Labour MP, said that we, as in the Labour Party, as in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party in 2019, to be specific, promised the Waspi women that they would get justice. Does Keir Starmer understand why they feel let down? And it was one of those points that was delivered, not like the way I've just delivered it, but with power and emotion, behind it from one of those people that has walked with those campaigners for a long time, as in Diane Abbott. Keir Starmer just repeated that he understood, repeated the justification and moved on. There is an issue about Keir Starmer with some in his party unhappy that... I think the government thinks it's on pretty safe ground with its decision not to compensate these Waspi women due to the state of the public finances, due to the fact that this is all about the government not notifying women who were born in their 50s of the raise in the state pension age, even though there was no obligation for the government to do so. So the government thinks it's on safe ground there. But the problem is, as in so many cases, the politics is a mess, because Labour recently was promising it would do this. And there were hints even from Keir Starmer, even when he was leader of the opposition, that he might, and lots of pictures of frontbenchers standing with those signs promising to help Waspi women. And then they decide not to. And I think it's the inelegance and the embarrassment that Labour's feeling today. And I don't think the tone of the Prime Minister, he doesn't always have a great deal of, different gears emotionally to go through when he's in the chamber dealing with this kind of stuff. He's just ever so slightly petulant in the way he dealt with Diane Abbott. And I can imagine that going ever so slightly badly down with fellow MPs.
Interesting stuff, Sam. Thanks very much for that. An immediate analysis. Coming up, we're going to be joined by a panel of MPs to dissect this week's Prime Minister's questions. Stay with us after the break for that.